I love a good comic book movie and I love a good creature feature, and this one is both. I'm Taylor James Johnson and I'm loving the 80s. That's right, especially this film from 1982. Wes Craven's Swamp Thing. It's a little bit of Legend of Boggy Creek mixed with a little bit of I Am Groot. And you know what? It taught us all to love and respect the swamp and love and respect the thing. So let's check out that thing again. Swamp Thing. Spit on that thing. No. But yeah, this is a DC movie.
The character of Swamp Thing first appeared in comics in House of Secrets number 92 in 1971. If you're wondering how the creature got such a unique name, creator Wein had trouble coming up with a name for his creature from the swamp, so he always referred to the project as the Swamp Thing I'm working on. He envisioned a character that protected his home and the environment in equal measure. And like any good superhero, he also had a human alter ego. Dr. Alec Holland. See, Holland is developing a biorestorative formula that can help save the world from starvation. After an accident turns Holland into Swamp Thing, he continues his mission to use nature to save humanity. After the success of Richard Donner's Superman, the question was asked, would comics serve as a pipeline for the movie industry? To be able to properly discuss the film Swamp Thing from 1982, we first need to discuss producer Michael Uslan. You may recognize that name from practically every DC film ever made. Before Uslan was producing superhero films, he was just a boy from New Jersey, obsessed with comic books. That obsession grew and grew to the point that he was teaching the first ever accredited course on comic books at Indiana University. So to say that Uslan is a fan of comics might just be understating things a bit. Having grown up on a darker version of Batman, Uslan was sick of the campy Adam West portrayal being the prominent version. So using the money he'd earned teaching, he bought the rights to Batman, as well as some other comic book characters. But he quickly decided that Batman would need more time and money, and therefore couldn't be his first film. So he focused on a lesser known property, about a man in a swamp. Wes Craven is often known for horror franchises A Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream. So he's not exactly someone you may immediately think of when it comes to a comic book movie. But what about a comic book movie with a lesser known character, with rather supernatural origins? Craven's feet had been pretty firmly planted in the horror world since his debut film, Last House on the Left. He had followed that up with The Hills Have Eyes, and yet he still yearned for more. Already, he was starting to gain a reputation as a filmmaker who went to the dark side of horror and explored very intense themes. Refusing to be pigeonholed as solely a horror director, Craven sought out to make an action movie. That's when he received a call from Michael Uslan about Swamp Thing. Having grown up in a Christian household that banned comic books, Craven knew nothing of the character. But after doing a deep dive into the world, he was smitten and agreed to tackle it with the sole caveat of making a purely entertaining movie. He wanted to be able to show that he had a lighter side and could create material for all audiences. Filming directly after completing Deadly Blessing, Craven got to work on Swamp Thing.
I don't know where we are, Toto. It sure is in Kansas.
This film was the epitome of low budget. Compared to Superman's price tag of $55 million, Swamp Thing was made for a mere $2.5 million. That's right, that's 5% of the Man of Steel's entire budget to make a character that mostly lives in a swamp. But Superman had the backing of Warner Brothers, while Swamp Thing was with first-time producer Michael Uslan. Not to mention, the Bond company that was responsible for the film's completion constantly forced Craven to cut scenes so that they would come in under budget. Wes would later describe the situation as not friendly, and they were not helpful. They just played the tough guys all the time. When it came to the casting of Dr. Alec Holland, Craven needed someone that he felt would be able to properly emote under a ton of makeup. Ray Wise took on the role and played it as his usual charming self. But given the role's large amount of stunt work, Dick Durock was cast as his stunt double. When filming, it became clear that Ray Wise and Dick Durock looked fundamentally different when under the makeup. So they decided that Dick would be in the Swamp Thing costume full time and Ray would just act as his human form.
The only dangerous thing out there are those government agents with their pop guns.
Adrian Barbeau plays Magnum PI. Let's try that again. Adrian Barbeau plays Abby Cable. Cable is actually a combination of two characters from the comics. Abby Arcane, who was the main villain's niece, and Matthew Cable, one of the hero's arch-villains. Abby is our main lead and really acts as the audience surrogate. She quickly falls for Holland and sets up the love story at its core. While Barbeau hadn't yet gained her massive reputation in the horror world, she was still big enough to receive an offer for the part when she received the script. Unsure of whether to even read it, her husband, John Carpenter, great filmmaker in his own right, suggested she give it a chance as he was a massive fan of Craven. She did, and the rest is history. We need to take a moment to talk about the absurdity of the main villain, Anton Arcane, played by Louis Jourdan. He works pretty well as the evil British bad guy. He always seems to be one step ahead of everyone and makes for a good villain. But then he transforms into this. What can only be described as a cross-dressing, scaly pigman emerges from a cocoon. If you think that Swamp Thing suffers from man-in-suit syndrome, then you haven't seen anything yet. Craven certainly hadn't forgotten his roots, bringing David Hess in as Ferret, the second in command to the big bad. Hess had starred in Craven's Last House on the Left in the very memorable role of Krug. Like his former role, Ferret is an eccentric that you can tell has bad intentions the moment he appears on screen. And he really proves that when he full-on kills this poor child. But thankfully Swamp Thing revives him, so we're still at a solid 0 for the child-killing part of this series. Thank God. The story of Swamp Thing follows fairly close to the comic origins, with Dr. Alec Holland deep in the swamp researching a formula for extreme plant regeneration. The idea is to be able to rid the world of starvation through plants. But Anton Arcane also wants the formula and he attacks the research station to get it. What precedes is a lot of death, as well as Holland being turned into the title character. We spend the rest of the time following Abby Cable as she tries to get what's survived of Holland's work out of Arcane's hands. It's very simple, but that's to be expected. When you compare it to today's work, the practical effects here can seem a little dated. But the detail work on Swamp Thing's face is ridiculously impressive, despite the very man-in-a-rubber suit look of the rest of him. But the great look of the Swamp Thing came at a price. Dick Durock constantly had to take breaks. The stuntman who played Arcane, Ben Bates, completely fainted while filming in the suit one day. And it's no surprise, because the production, wanting to save money, filmed all but one scene in the swamps of South Carolina. This resulted in a very limited crew and resources.
Oh,
The film is filled to the brim with unintentionally funny moments. With the title character's super slow movement and awkward stunts being the real star here, another moment may also stand out. While filming, the owner of Arcane's limo didn't want his vehicle fishtailed in order to turn around quickly. So what resulted was this absolutely absurd moment of the limo stopping to turn around. Knowing the background, what makes it even funnier is how the accompanying SUV almost hits the limo. Can't imagine the owner would have been too happy about that. Once production finally wrapped, the film was very quickly edited together. When it came to the music, Craven leaned into the horror of it all by bringing in Friday the 13th composer Harry Manfredini to score the film. If you listen, you can definitely hear some similarities between the two. All that's missing is the little Given that Craven is wanting to distance himself from horror, this collaboration is confusing. The movie actually ended up being quite the cult success. However, its goofiness and silly action almost ruined Craven's career. While he was setting out to make a fun popcorn flick that featured a nice love story at its core, many saw it as a campy creature feature that lacked the interesting themes of Craven's past work. Craven went on a 2-year drought where he had to sell his home and even borrow money from Friday the 13th co-creator Sean Cunningham. Thankfully, he bounced back by returning firmly to the horror genre and gaining legendary status with A Nightmare on Elm Street, an idea he actually started formulating while on the Swamp Thing set. Unlike their director, the stars of the film wouldn't be hampered quite as much by the film's lack of initial success. Adrian Barbeau went on to become quite the scream queen with roles in films like The Fog, Escape from New York, and Creepshow. In 1983, Louis Jourdan starred as Kamal Khan, the main Bond villain in Octopussy, which would be the biggest role of his career. Ray Wise starred in a bevy of different films over the years, even returning to the DC world as Commissioner Gordon in the animated film Batman: The Killing Joke. In 1989, producers really decided to lean into the campiness and released a sequel, Return of Swamp Thing. This near parody featured the return of both Dick Durock as Swamp Thing and Louis Jourdan. Heather Locklear stepped into the love interest role, and Ray Wise was completely left out of the project. The unique parody approach worked because just 1 year later, Swamp Thing the TV show debuted on the USA Network. It featured Durock returning as the titular creature. There's no Abby Arcane character in the series, but Anton Arcane returned as the main villain, this time played by Mark Lindsay Chapman. The show lasted for 3 seasons and 72 episodes and was a staple of the Sci-Fi Channel in reruns. Like many of his superhero counterparts, Swamp Thing received an animated series in 1991. Unfortunately, it didn't prove popular and the series was canceled after only 5 episodes. When Swamp Thing was originally released on DVD, a mistake was made when printing, and the international version was instead put on US discs. This wouldn't be an issue except that the international version had nudity. Barbeau was shown bathing in the swamp full frontal, as well as some naked gypsies during the party scene towards the end. These are the main changes, so it's pretty evident what they thought European audiences liked. Funnily enough, MGM tried to just get Barbeau to sign off on the mistake, to avoid spending money on recalling the DVDs. But she refused, citing the terms of her contract. While the film was released via Shout Factory on Blu-ray, and has a ton of cool features, the set is out of print and therefore fairly expensive to purchase. But there's a cheaper Region B version from 88 Films that doesn't break the bank if you're desperate to have it but don't want to pay the absurd price. The character was brought back to the small screen for the streaming service DC Universe and later CW with Swamp Thing. This Derek Mears starer featured a much darker tone and was more in line with the comic material written by Alan Moore, which was the character's most popular run in the 80s. Adrian Barbeau even appeared on the show in a cameo role. Unfortunately, the show was canceled after only 1 season, despite positive reviews. Whether or not DC returns to the world of Swamp Thing is anyone's guess. With the recent failure of the TV show still lingering, a movie seems less likely to manifest. If they do, whether it takes inspiration from this film, the TV show, or the comic series, it'll be unlike any other comic book film.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. Joe Blow was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.